Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the Niqabi Diaries series by The Pen, the sound of sisters raising their voices with the written word. I'm your host Samar, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of By the Pen, the sound of sisters raising their voices with the written word. Inshallah, today with us we have a sister called Sarah. Sister, could you please introduce yourself for the listeners and tell us about your book, inshallah?
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, guys. My name is Sarah Mainuddin. I am the author of Demystifying the Niqab, the history of the face veil, the laws against it, and why it is important. A little background on me. I'm a recent graduate student with my master's in Near Eastern Studies. I decided to write my book about the niqab. Just as a Muslim woman wears a hijab, I kind of just fell into writing the book, and I decided to call it Demystifying the Niqab. And the book's a history of the face veil, the laws against it, and why it's important. That's why I named it that. But there's a book called Demystifying Sharia Law, and I saw that and I was like, oh, that's how I kind of got the name for my book, actually. And I made sure to, in my title, to make sure to have the word face veil in there so people who weren't Muslim would know what I was talking about.
Okay, mashallah, mashallah. So, sister, could you just give me some more insight as to what inspired you or motivated you to actually write this book? Because as somebody who, you mentioned you wear the hijab, but you're not wearing the niqab yourself. What was it about the niqab particularly that made you feel you wanted to write such a comprehensive book? Because actually, I've got a copy myself, mashallah, and you had invited me as well to actually, interview as part of this book. And so, and I know you've spoken to other sisters who wear the niqab as well, and even some non-Muslim women who also wear the veil, as well as the beginning of the book, you've gone into such an extensive history covering, the history of the niqab in different countries, and so what is it that really motivated you? What was your goals like with writing this book?
So the first thing, it was very kind of coming out myself. I failed multiple times, but it's still one of my ultimate goals. And however, I think just seeing it, seeing other people wear niqab the first time on campus, I was like, oh, cool, whatever. And then I bought one off of Amazon, and I don't recommend anyone buying a niqab off of Amazon, but just try on. And I was like, oh, I really like this. And that kind of got me into understanding what the niqab was. And slowly I started talking to a woman named Sarah, who is a Saudi. She's still moved back to Saudi Arabia. So she was my first person I actually talked to who wore the niqab in person. But what really frustrated me personally was at that time, early mid 2000s, 2015, I started noticing the anti-veiling rhetoric, and it first kind of started phobia in France, even though it was a little bit before, my time of being aware, just all these European laws and rhetoric. And I started seeing that on the news. And then I started seeing Muslims themselves, really Muslims themselves, that I started noticing anti-niqab rhetoric. In my own Muslim community was where I actually was hearing a lot more anti-veiling rhetoric towards women who wore the niqab. People were kind of nonchalantly just saying, women who wear the niqab think they're better than us. Women, you don't need to wear that. Oh, they're all that. Just very rude comments to women who wore it, and also not wanting to have a conversation with women who were wearing the niqab, and bothered me a little. And then seeing my own Muslim community kind of throw women who wore the niqab to the wolves and being as rude women who wore the niqab. And I was like, what is going on here? And I kind of started researching the niqab myself. I just started slowly reading just generic books about the hijab, like in politics and stuff. And then I noticed any book talked about veiling, they always left out the face veil. And it was like, if you're going to talk about Muslim women and the hijab, you need to talk about women who wear the face veil. And these books act like the only people that exist are hijabis. And it just bothered me. And that was kind of how I started writing the book and researching it.
MashaAllah. So, okay, so what would you say was your biggest challenge when writing this book? Because obviously you talked about some of the research you did, and when it came to actually finding out information about the niqab, I expect that would have been quite challenging considering what you've just said.
It was. In Europe, I found some really good writers. Like, you'd think there would be a lot of writings on the niqab and Islamic theology that was more broad-based, and you think they would be more, and you have to dive into the history of the face veil. Even researching words of like face veil, or trying to, when you first start your research on finding, face veil of India or something, you want to find the Hindu, Gujarati, these women in this one particular area wear it. And there's women who wear it. There's pictures of women wearing it. There's lines of news articles. What you get was maybe a sentence, maybe one research article. For the woman who wore the veil in Korea, because in Korea it was a common practice to wear a face veil up into the Japanese invasion during World War II, before World War II. And you can see in K-dramas, like Korean dramas, women covering their faces.
Yeah.
But you can't find one writing on it. I found one writing, and it was the most frustrating thing to find. And so I had to find costume books. Costume books helped a lot to find, even from information about Muslims. I felt like it was easier to find information on Muslim women than it was to find on non-Muslim women. And I mentioned in the book how it has to do with that Orientalist way of how they ward the word veil. They associate the veil with Muslimness. And so if you type in Google veil, you'll automatically get Muslim woman, terrorist. And that happens in search engines too. Like if you go to, at least in the United States, if I used my university library, I would always get Muslim woman, even if I was very specific, even if I used the correct word from that correct culture, it would send me directly to Muslim woman. I was like, yeah, I want Muslim woman too, but I also want to, round out the topic so I can understand it better. Or you're trying to find Muslim woman. I was trying to find a Niqabi source written by Niqabi woman as well, theology based, because not because I hate men or anything. It's just I wanted to keep rounding out the story, to round it out a little bit more, my research. So I had more than just one. And when you find Niqabi theology, it's usually like 3 sources. And then it did help that Europe and right now India kept passing laws against, the burkini and the niqab and the hijab while I was writing the book. And I was like, oh my God, can you guys stop?
I take it you added those into your writing as well.
Yes, I did, until they did something up until September of last year. Okay. And then anything that happened, since September 2021, I haven't had a chance to add anything.
Right, subhanAllah. So how long did it take you to actually collect all the information and put the book together?
I would say, let me think, about 3 to 4 years, I would say.
MashaAllah.
I feel like the most of the really good stuff, in my opinion, happened in the past 2 years when I was doing my master's, because my master's thesis correlated uh, with white feminism. And then I kind of was able to broaden my horizon, and I found more sources on the niqab too. So it helped.
So can I ask you a question about what you mentioned previously when you was talking about women in Korea, for example? They used to also wear face veil, and it was quite normal up until the Japanese invasion. So you said that you found it hard to find any images or much writing on those kind of subjects. What do you think the reason for that is?
It would probably help if I could read and write in Korean. I'm sure in Korea there's plenty of research on it if I could read and write in Korean. So I'm not bashing from a Western information getting in the West. I would assume there might be more than one research paper, but it honestly, I think it has to do with correlating the face veil with Islam. It's because even if I look, like I said, with research engines on university libraries, even if you put the Jamgut in there, it'll go straight to Muslim women in Morocco or some, straight to Muslim women in Saudi Arabia. And you're like, okay, that's not what I researched, but okay. It has to do with search engines possibly being, Islamophobic. And that's has to do, I had a woman in one of my courses, and she does library science, and she talked about that as well, because as a Black American woman, she was dealing with noticing the research engine, how it would kind of do weird things like that. And so it really has to do with someone has to fix the algorithm to help researchers research better. And there are papers you have to read what that person is citing. And in Korea, like I said, K-dramas, they have women wearing it.
Yes, they do.
And K-dramas, but from Western audiences, they don't notice that because like if you watch a historical drama and about, England or France, northern France, or the areas where European women traditionally wore face veils, you're not on the TV. You're not going to see that in movies. And it has to do with associating the veil with Islam and Orientalism, Islamophobia. And also because they don't think it looks pretty for their, reenactment of Henry IV or whatever. They don't think it looks aesthetically grisly. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. So, okay, when you decided that you was going to write this book, who was your main target audience, would you say?
I would say my main target audience had to be non-Muslims themselves, because I wanted them to understand what the veil is. And of course, I feel like Niqabi women were reading like, yeah, I know this is, and I was trying to write it to people, and not even just to non-Muslims, it's to Muslims too. I would say definitely the Muslims that kind of throw Niqabi women under the bus. And it shouldn't have to be that we have to point that out. It shouldn't have to be that if you're doing I work for a nonprofit, and one of the images for her book, and her book's about Muslim women, and I had to say, no, you have to choose a Niqabi woman for your cover as well. If you're going to have a collage of Muslim women on your cover, put a woman who wears a face veil on your cover. There is a prominent female writer right now who writes, YA fiction, and so many other women. There was a woman that was in Saudi Arabia that's in Vogue. There's so many different Niqabis out there, and put some representation. Stop. Muslims themselves are putting Niqabi women as they're kind of degrading them the same way as the West is doing.
Yes.
And it frustrates me. And that was the the audience is for people like that, for Westerners, and people just like history too, to be honest.
SubhanAllah. So yeah, I agree with you, because I come across the same thing online as well. And anytime I see, like, you know, these kind of messages about Muslim women doing positive things, and they have these kind of collages showing different Muslim women, you'll see every type of Muslim woman except from a niqabi, like, on these covers. And so it's something I've noticed as well. And even recently, there was a brother actually who made a post about sisters, and, you know, this kind of red pill, pink pill foolishness that's going on with, like, you know, it's in the Muslim community as well now, basically. But he put up this, it was a post, and he had like 3 images. So the first 2 images, he had like hijabi, like, you know, illustrations, and they was talking about Muslim women in positive ways, basically, and, oh, you should be like them, you know, be like Fatima or be like Sarah or whatever, you know. And then the third one was some like extremists, Muslim feminists, and he had a drawn as a niqabi, and people was just like, well, why have you chosen 2 hijabis and then put like the extremist feminist, like negative, like, you know, like the worst kind of, you know, woman you can think of, and then represented her as being a sister with niqab. Do you know what I mean? And he's a brother, and it's just like, why would you do that? Because if a sister had done something similar, where she put maybe 2 brothers with no beard, and then the brother with the beard as the, you know, I don't know, red pill, like evil woman beating, I don't know, whatever, then you wouldn't like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's just like, you see this representation, and it's just like, people, it's in the Muslim community, people will say things like, oh, they don't have a problem with the niqab, but actually the things that you do and the things that you say show that you do obviously have a problem with it. Somewhere you have a problem.
I 100% agree. And that was honestly the one thing that I would say shocked me the most. Because, you know, like, I converted to Islam years ago. So I started wearing the hijab, you know, I started wearing the hijab as soon as I converted. But my husband, I didn't realize that there was a huge thing with the niqab in the Muslim community, because the Muslims that I was introduced with and I was converted at a university area with diverse Muslims. And it wasn't until I left that community with my husband to where I'm at now that I started to mix with like other communities of Muslims. And it was just so shocking to me to just see this like negativity towards the niqab and all this like weird rhetoric in the Muslim community. And that's kind of why, you know, I started to research my book. And it just was one of those things that I was like, oh, what? And that's why, if you noticed in my book, I have a disclaimer in the beginning. If you notice, there was my introduction, and then I had like a note from the author that was my disclaimer, because I had so many conversations with Muslim women who didn't wear a hair veil, who didn't wear or didn't wear a niqab. And as soon as I said my book was about the niqab and about being pro niqab, they would automatically start telling me, oh, you know, niqab is bad, it's oppressive. In my country, it's so terrible, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, you're comparing, you know, apples and oranges. I'm not talking about, I think women should have the right to wear what they want to wear and feel comfortable wearing what they want to wear. A woman in the UK is not the same. She's not facing the same challenges as a woman, let's say a random country, like my husband's country, Bangladesh. You're not facing the same things. You're comparing 2 different cultures, 2 different atmospheres, different laws against each other. And there's no reason why a woman in the UK can't go get ice cream without being harassed getting ice cream while wearing the niqab. There should be no reason for it. Just as a woman who doesn't wear a hair veil should be able to get ice cream in Pakistan without getting harassed. I'm pro both options, regardless of my, religious affiliation with it. Both people should have the option. But as soon as I mention, this is about Western laws, because I didn't want to get into, the Egyptian laws again. When I did my map about anti-veiling laws, I was really shocked that most anti-veiling laws are from Muslim countries. I was really shocked by that. Maybe in the future I'll write about it. I have to dive into it. But it's just crazy. That's why I had to write the disclaimer, because Muslims would instantly dismiss my book. As soon as I said the niqab, they would go, "Oh, I don't want to talk about religion." And I was like, yes, it has to do with religion, but it also has to do with the right for women to wear it, and their right. I mean, it's both and it's not. And that's how Muslims themselves dismiss the niqab, is they'll automatically go, "Oh, I don't want to talk about religion. Oh, I don't want to talk about extremism." And it's like, you have to. You can't dismiss it because you don't want to talk about it.
SubhanAllah. It's interesting that you said that as well, because I was thinking about, the point you picked up on about a lot of the niqab ban laws, they've been introduced in Muslim countries even before non-Muslim countries. And most of it is in relation to the education that a woman can receive, because they're banned in schools or universities, for example. So basically, it's like a Muslim woman, she needs to choose between her religious beliefs and the choice for education. And that's what's being put on her in a lot of these Muslim countries. But nobody seems to have a problem with that, because they just don't want the women to cover. And it is related to the religion as well, like he said, because that's what comes to people's minds when you mention the niqab. Oh, I don't want to talk about religion. So it's like, it's clear that in some ways, the niqab itself is a representation of Islam. And that's what people don't want. That's why they don't want the niqab.
No, I 100% agree. And that's why I purposely put in interviews from women who weren't Muslim in my book, because I wanted people to see, specifically those people who go, "Oh, it's about Islam." I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. You know what your problem is. It's Islamophobia, it's Orientalism. You know what your problem is. And even for Muslims themselves, you know what the problem is. You know exactly what you're correlating, is what type of Islam you're correlating with the niqab. You're not correlating with your, secular, whatever Islam. You're correlating it with women's oppression with Islam, and it makes you look bad. You think, oh, well, because there's no logic to it. Honestly, the hate towards it is no logic. Why are you banning a woman from wearing a niqab or a hijab in some cases from getting a job inside of an office? If anything, that should be a place where you should promote it. That not promote it, but a safe space. That should be a safe space for a woman who does wear a niqab, should be able to work in an office without being harassed. But in reality, it's either she has to take it off if she wants a job, she has to take it off if she wants an education. They act like somehow learning quantum mechanics means you have to show your face. It makes no sense.
Exactly.
At all.
Yeah, SubhanAllah.
And I don't talk about it a lot, but the one thing that I think could be fun to introduce more into the book later, because I consider this book like a living thing that I'll have to update, is I want to talk about surveillance a little bit too.
Yes.
I think that would be something interesting to also note how the face veil is problematic. And then I've also wanted to, as soon as I can articulate myself, is if you ever watch hip hop and you see the face veils women wear that has the hole cut out for their mouth.
Yeah.
I notice how I'm like, oh, so that's okay, but covering your mouth is not okay in those settings, and it's
Yes.
very linked to sex.
Yes, of course.
So that's why I had to talk about sexuality in my book and talk about, especially France's weird definition of sexuality is still one of those things that confuses me. But I don't understand how you can call yourself, equality when you sexualize women so much.
Yes,
But,
of course.
but yeah, and I wish I could have, another thing that I was surprised about with this research without meaning to was there's a lot of women who follow heathen paganism that wear hair.
Yeah, subhanallah. Yeah.
I was like, what? I don't know why, but I was like, okay, that's very random.
Yeah, I read through a couple of the sections in your book where you interviewed some of those non-Muslim women who were wearing it, and I've come across some online as well at different points in time, and I've noticed that as well. So it's interesting, and I thought it was beneficial actually that you did include it in your book, because people need to be aware of these things, as something that, something different that people actually do, because we know obviously that veiling itself isn't something that only appeared at the time of Islam. It's something that did exist previous to that as well. So, and it's not something that was linked with any kind of oppression previously either. So it's something that when people keep mentioning it, trying to attach it to only Islam, but then because Islam is like the big oppressor of women, basically that's what they're trying to say. So this is like, that's the direction that they're going in, obviously.
I noticed, the veil itself is very hyper feminine. And I say that in a good way. I like femininity in a good way, but for the West, that's very negative. For a very hyper masculine society, having hyper femininity they put onto the veil is very negative for them, because they consider femininity in a negative setting, and being feminine is wrong. And you can see that in how white women discourse, how they being any sort of feminine is wrong when they emulate masculine settings. And that was something really interesting that I thought about. And it's kind of true, because if you think about it, even historically, only women most of the time wore face veil.
Yeah.
Any setting, even hair veil. I mean, yeah, you can point out like, you had the turban or various settings for men, but really it's women that wore it, and women who wore it for religious purposes or spiritual purposes, or for whatever reason, because they're wealthy. And it was a piece of clothing that is linked to a woman's religiosity or femininity in that aspect. And it's very interesting to think it like that, where maybe that's an issue, is because it makes a woman more feminine. And it's just, I thought that was kind of interesting when I was researching.
Absolutely. So on that note, you mentioned that you think that in future you'll be doing kind of maybe some revisions to the book, and possibly adding some more details of different kind of things, bringing it in. Is being an author something that you thought you'd always do?
Yeah, actually, I've always wanted to be an author since I was a little girl. Obviously I wasn't thinking I would write about politics, history, or Islamophobia, or write about the veil in any sort of way. I originally wanted to, I always thought I would write a book about fairies, but that's never, it hasn't happened yet, but inshallah it might happen.
Mashallah. That was unexpected. Okay.
That was, it's my love for supernatural and
fantasy kind of stuff. Yeah. If you're gonna make up a story, isn't it? Mashallah. Okay, so who would you say has been your biggest supporter while writing this book?
I would say that the biggest supporter actually is she's in her late 80s. She's a family friend / grandmother. She's so close to my family that it's pretty much she's blood relative, but not. she was the first person to, she read through my book, the first, like, way beginning of it when I had it like in a very rudimentary stage. She read it, helped edit it a little bit, and she kept, even throughout the process, she would talk to people about my book and always hyping me up. And so I think she was the biggest supporter of it. And
okay, so what advice would you give to someone who wanted to write a book, especially for other Muslim women, for example, who are looking or thinking about writing a book? What would you advise them?
I think if you're writing, it depends what kind of book you're writing. If you're writing a nonfiction book like me, expect to have moments of just frustration in general. And it's okay to have moments where you just want to throw something against the wall because either you're writing stuff about Muslim women in politics. And if you plan on writing a book about Muslim women in politics, just plan on venting your frustration in some form, healthy way, because you're always going to be hit with negativities. But if you're just writing, I would just say just write. First of all, just make sure you write and let it out, and then you can always edit it later, go back, delete things, because you're going to constantly read things and you're going to be like, oh, why did I write this? And that's okay. That's what writing is for. And if you're citing your sources, I would say always make sure next to the source you cite, in parentheses, put the last name of the author, even if that's not how you're going to cite the source. But be very particular with your sources, because trust me, when it gets to that time to make your bibliography or works cited, whatever, it's going to be very annoying when you can't find the source that you cite. And it happens. So just be very particular on that, and then it'll help with the ease.
Inshallah, mashallah. Jazakallah khair, sister, for giving your time today. And it's been a pleasure talking to you about your book, which I'm really excited to read myself, inshallah, especially because of the topic that you've chosen. And I can really relate as well, because that's the reason that I started this podcast, the Niqabi Diaries, too. So alhamdulillah, and now it's brought us to this point here, because obviously that's how we connected as well, through the podcast Niqabi Diaries, when you came across me with that, I think. So alhamdulillah, it just goes to show, like, we have a common goal, but there's so many different ways in which we can achieve, some of our goals and what we're trying to do. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So where can people find your book?
Well, the easiest place worldwide would be Amazon. Okay. It's on every single platform in the Amazon around the world that has Amazon. If United States, you can also do Barnes and Noble. I would just recommend the Amazon copy worldwide, or you can just message me if you don't want to go through. Some people don't like Amazon. You can just DM me and let me know. And if you want photos of books, like I have plenty of photo of artwork that I didn't include in the book because I can't afford to pay somebody like hundreds of dollars per picture, let me know and I can send you the photos.
Okay.
For anybody, that's fine. It's all about sharing the knowledge,
Okay, well, yeah, that'll be great, inshallah. Yeah. So you said that if they don't want to do Amazon or Barnes and Noble, they can DM you and you can organize it that way as well.
Yes.
Fantastic, mashallah. So inshallah, we'll put all the details to your Instagram and any other methods of connecting with you in the description box, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Great. Okay. Jazakallah khair, sister. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And inshallah, I pray that your book does very well, because you've done something that I think is very important.
All I hope is we can at least reverse one law. That's my goal.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.